Greetings, students. I wanted to talk to you about quiz number 2. Keep in mind that if you study hard, you can live fast. Remember I mentioned to you last time that I'm a happy person grading your papers? The grading scale is the same as for the first quiz. And here are your multiple choice responses. The first, about placing art in context, understanding what was going on in the High Renaissance, Mannerist period, Northern Renaissance, and then the Counter-Reformation. The second portion focusing on vocabulary, art terminology, about how we describe the paintings that we find from this period. And I see here that my text is a little out of whack, so I'm just going to fix it while we're all right here. Okay, so those all important essay questions. How did Martin Luther pull off the Protestant Reformation? I believe by emphasizing the significance of understanding the Protestant Reformation, especially through those really good explanations from Smart History, and then I gave you a detailed list of bullet points to recall. So you could have mentioned, amongst many things, the fact that Martin Luther translated the Bible into the common vernacular of his people. He pointed out that you didn't need a priest in order to pray. He had really cool friends like Erasmus, people who traveled, who were writers who were widely respected, who were in religious agreement with him. Don't forget, we've got that all-important printing press, which is not just an art tool, but it is also a way of disseminating information rapidly at a low cost. Remember Cranach's example of good and evil, something that was constructed in a painting and then transferred to the print medium as an inexpensive way of reinforcing basic principles in the Bible. Remember Holbein, court painter to Henry VIII, and that dicey job he had of trying to paint images of the women that Henry may or may not marry. Remember that there was the increasing difficulties with following some basic tenets of faith in the Catholic Church from that moment in time, including some dishonesty, the granting of indulgences, and a lot of popes who were not living simple lives. And there's so many other things that you could have thrown in there as well. All right, so in our VoiceThread discussion, we had you talk in detail about the origin of a Basilican plan church. In your essay response, I had to see the word Roman law court. That's the thing, that's the root of the word, right? A basilica was a law court until it became a church. And it became a church at the behest of Constantine, who was giving a good work in the form of Old St. Peter's. They already knew how to create these elongated structures that they had in their law courts, so they just changed the entrance and it became a church. The fundamental architectural elements then, the nave, the aisles, the transept, the crossing, the apse, and the altar, all have a specific function, and mostly it's about moving around the church. And then we always care about the transept and the crossing, because where they meet, where the transept and the nave cross, is where we've got the dome or a tower or some kind of interesting artistic element. For your comparison, we had two Last Suppers. The Counter-Reformation version by Tintoretto, and then the classic version, High Renaissance, Leonardo. Okay, and so you could talk about the story from the Bible itself, and then how it morphs across these two very different times that aren't that far apart on the art history timeline. The classical High Renaissance Leonardo, which is a exercise in linear perspective. Remember, Christ centered in the window with the horizon line equal with his eyes, the architectural elements that all point back to him as a focal point. Remember the algebra problem of the number of disciples and how many windows in the Trinity and all that kind of stuff, which is, by contrast, completely thrown out by what Tintoretto does in his very interesting work, verging on the Baroque, but not quite there yet, but that strong diagonal created by the table itself. And those guys don't look like holy disciples. It looks like they're having a wild dinner party. Remember that Tintoretto separates the picture plane into the sacred, which is on the left, and the secular or non-religious, which is on the right. So the woman washing dishes and the cat jumping into the dishwasher. Then there's all these mystic elements, things we don't quite know what they are, because part of the Counter-Reformation agenda was to bring the mystery of God back to church, something that they were not interested in the North. One was a fresco, one is an oil, and there's just so many other things that you could say. Now, I bet you found this question challenging. You were supposed to, right? So I asked you to discuss any three elements, concepts that make up Renaissance humanism. Support your remarks by naming works of art that demonstrate humanist ideals. Tell me as much as you can about the works, as well as what was happening in the regions that they were from. So rather than give you too much of a laundry list here, I give you the example that I would have chosen of Michelangelo's Ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the one portion of the true wet fresco where Adam reaches up to receive life from God. This is a perfect demonstration of the concept of Renaissance ideals, of human beings not being passive in their faith, but active in their faith. And that's what happens when Adam reaches up in that way. Talking about what was happening in Italy as far as the city-state versus monarchy, environmental factors such as geography, the trade in both regions, things like the plague and how that influenced economic factors. But keep in mind those basic ideas of the Renaissance humanism, of education for everyone, a fresh reading of Greco-Roman antiquities, the idea that it wasn't just enough to be successful, you needed to do good works, you needed to do good things for people. And these high-tone ideas didn't just they were meant to apply to everyone, but they basically were enacted by the wealthy, because those who were the rest of us, right, the 92%, they didn't have time to do these things. So that's why they're called ideals. They're not called realities, huh? So this is what they were striving for. The good news is that it spurred big changes in art and architecture. Once again, if you had a disaster, you have an opportunity to improve your grade. Please rewrite those essays and get them to me by the end of this next week's unit. Remember to do it as soon as possible to get it out of the way, because you have got to go for Baroque. Thanks for your hard work.